All right, calling the June 13th Planning and Development Committee meeting to order. We have members here in person, but also members
recording in progress,
but as well as members tuning in remotely. And so we're going to do a roll call. Yep. Thank you.
Councilmember Kelly, Councilmember Nguyen, Councilmember Newsma,
Here.
Councilmember Burns,
Here.
Councilmember Suffredin.
I'm here, but I am no longer on this committee.
Correct, you're not on this committee. Thank you for
But
that.
thank you. I would like to contribute some comments later if the chair will indulge me, and I appreciate you recognizing me.
Okay,
Hedekaris.
right, I was going down the line. Councilmember Revelle,
Here.
Councilmember Reed,
Here.
Councilmember Hadikaris.
Here.
All right. Moving on to approval of minutes of the regular Planning and Development Committee meeting of May 9th, 2022. Can I have a motion, please?
So move.
All right. Any discussion? Seeing none.
Doing a roll call for this too? Okay, sorry. Councilmember Newsma,
Aye.
Councilmember Burns,
Aye.
Councilmember Revelle,
Aye.
Councilmember Reed,
Aye.
Councilmember Hadikaris.
Aye.
All right. Anybody for public comment? Pat Fowler.
Good evening. I am Pat Fowler, Evanston resident, also own the Firehouse Grill restaurant, Chicago on Main Street. Here tonight to urge the committee to consider moving P3, the amendment for billboards, to City Council. For us, being a retail business, every source of revenue we can get's really, really important. Looking into getting a billboard on the back of our building, I've talked with a couple businesses that are willing to do it, but current city code doesn't allow for us to do that. So what I'm proposing is along the L tracks just behind the building. So obviously getting more retail revenue would be very helpful for us and also for the city to be able to get permit revenue as well if the billboards were allowed in other parts of town. So thank you very much for considering it.
Thank you, sir. Councilmember Suffredin, would you like to make a comment? Did I hear that correctly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I would just like to urge passage of both P1 and P3. I'll just be real quick about the billboards, particularly. It's an opportunity for us to help businesses realize some income, and also there can be a piece for the city in terms of fees and revenue generated that way. It's something that we should consider looking at for our facilities. If you go to James Park now, you'll see that there are advertisements on the various fields already. Robert Crown, there are advertisements in the ice rink. The concept of billboards themselves aren't necessarily that offensive. And while I appreciate the Land Use Commission's position, they have a different purview than we do. They are not tasked with being supportive of local businesses or generating revenue or balancing a budget. So I encourage passage of both P1 and P3, and thank you for the time, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you for those comments. Moving on to items for consideration. Can someone move P1, please?
I will move item P1, which I will read in a second. You want me to read it? I need to get to that page. Give me a second.
You made the motion. I can read it. 52022, amending City Code Title 6, zoning to remove references to the Plan Commission and Zoning Board of Appeals and to include reference to the Land Use Commission. It's been motioned by Councilmember Newsma and seconded by Councilmember Revelle. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll do the roll call.
Councilmember Newsma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed? Okay, let the record, okay, we got an aye from him, okay. Councilmember Hadikatis?
Aye.
The motion passes. That moves us on. Also for introduction, item P2. Can someone move item P2, please?
Mr. Chair, I will move item P2, adoption of ordinance 34-0-22, amending the city code regarding design and project review.
All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Newsma and seconded by Councilmember Ravel. Any discussion? Councilmember Newsma.
I do have some questions here, and I guess this is probably for staff. The way the memo is phrased, the committee would still meet in a less formal setting and would still vote. And I have questions on the terminology vote, which implies a democratic process of rendering some qualitative judgment. But I'm not sure if that precisely explains what actually happens, because it's not as if, for example, everybody but the representative from the police department could be happy with something and the police department would get outvoted, right? That's not clearly the intent of the process here. So if you could just explain that a little bit better.
Sure. Well, we've talked about this as staff, is how we maintain the evaluation measures and the sort of qualitative and almost quantitative in some instances to make sure that there's conformance with the code. I think right now, when we do vote formally, there is this sense of DAPR has voted this down, and that's not what has happened. It's just the voting is the democratic way to formulate a recommendation to when things move forward. So I think that there would still be the process by which, okay, we're do the count, who's ready to move this project forward, because sometimes the project isn't quite ready. We just had one at 2044 Wesley where there were still some outstanding questions. We kept it at DAPR. They got some more information. They refined some plans. They gave us more information, and then we were able to say, okay, we're ready. That you now look like you've addressed some of the issues for the code. We're going to move this forward. So I think that's the idea there, is that we're trying to just build some consensus among staff. And then we also gave a better, more finer grain approach to some of our recommendations in terms of making sure that the issues related to public works and community development and fire were sort of more demarcated that way. So if there is a split perspective or split findings on this, we're better calling out public works, fire, or somebody else has those particular issues, and less so staff as this general body, and trying to stick more to the code and the evaluation measures that are already lined out in the code.
So the intent of the process is for staff review, is for proposals to go through staff review before they get to the Land Use Commission, to ensure that they are code compliant, right? Which is a fairly balls and strikes kind of call,
Yep.
right? It's a voting. Voting is something the council should do. It's not something a staff committee should do, is what I'm getting at. And that's not the intent.
Right, and we have never, to my knowledge, put in a memo other than in minutes. And I think it was made at the last P&D meeting where there was this desire to see more of like a sort of findings of fact in terms of here are the standards or things that we've found out from the project or in review, and provide those comments. Those are more useful,
right?
Because I think what I've heard from you and your colleagues over the years, as well as members of the land use, they read the minutes of DAPR and they're less concerned, I think, about the vote than some of the comments that staff make.
Yeah.
And so if we can find a way to better highlight those versus the staff, I mean, we are a council manager form of government, we write staff recommends, but I think providing more background on that would be helpful to everybody.
And I also have some questions about the efficiency of this process. And as I understand it, like one of the main drivers for making this change is to make the process more efficient. Is that
So yeah, we can
Correct?
definitely, yeah. So perfect example, last week, 1801 Central Street came to Dapper. There was some issues with the site plan and that Public Works needed some additional information. So I said, okay, well, he can come back next week. But really, it was probably an item, and you were both, I don't know if you had joined at that
Yeah.
point, but the item was a pretty minor-ish item. But it needed to get reviewed by staff. If we'd gotten those items later, in the new world system of what we're dealing with, if we'd gotten those documents later that afternoon, staff might have been able to look at it, depending on the depth of what they needed to do. They could have looked at it in the afternoon and then maybe the next morning, and we could have maybe administratively met real quick for 20 minutes and said, looks good, let's move it along. But in our current system, because we've set up to have these in-person meetings with notices and all of that, we have to wait a week. So that burns a lot of time
Burns
for
a
them.
week.
It burns a week, and then we pulled ourselves together for a formality. And so right now we could just, if in that, if we're going to continue to meet on Tuesday afternoons or Tuesday mornings or whenever makes sense, this just gives us more flexibility as well.
But I guess I'm concerned from the applicant's perspective that staff flexibility might ultimately result in a longer process, because now they have to track down 5 or 6 different departments to get them to weigh in, as opposed to having everybody in the room when they show up. And
Yeah.
if they don't get it one week, maybe they come back the next week.
I think
But from the applicant's
yeah.
perspective, they have to be in one place at one time, talking to one body, rather than chasing a bunch of different departments down.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to continue that efficiency and trying to meet on what, say everybody be available for this point in time, because we also have had projects, what I see happen informally after now, we were virtual for a year and, do we have to go downstairs?
Tornado warning, take shelter now in a basement or interior room. So
Yeah, we're going to stand at ease. We are being asked to, to shelter in a basement, so we're going to take a break, and we will be back shortly. We were at P2. Just to reiterate, we're at P2, Ordinance 34022, amending Title 4, Chapter 14, Design and Project Review, DAPR of the City Code, and we'll pick back up with Councilmember Nusma's comments or questions.
thank you, Mr. Chair. So I had some questions remaining about, I think we covered the impact on efficiency, and the intent is that this will save staff time and result in hopefully even faster processing times from the applicant's perspective. I would like to talk about transparency, because taking this kind of offline, removing a public meeting, what used to be a public meeting, and making it a non-public process is a step away from transparency, and how can we address those concerns?
Sure. So I will point out that there's nothing, at some point, we started having these meetings and we put an agenda up somewhere and they started to be perceived as a public meeting. But there's nothing in our code currently that requires these meetings to be public. There's no open meetings act requirements to my understanding for this group. But it just happened that as time went on, we took comments from invested neighbors and it turned into this public meeting of sorts. So in terms of how we maintain the knowledge and information that this stuff is going on. One, we report this, we do a lot of reporting of anything that happens at DAPR in the weekly city manager's report. So we had already been talking as staff as how we maybe bolster that a little bit, provide a little bit more information on what would be reviewed through what we're calling it now, the DAPR process, not the DAPR committee, the DAPR process. Provide more of our findings of fact and the comments that have, we wouldn't be producing minutes, but we could be producing the staff comments from those reviews. We've also talked about when we send out cards for minor variances, which have come before the DAPR committee, they come before a small group of staff. If we send out information or put information on our website about the projects that staff is currently reviewing, we can link right there to a spot for people to provide comments. We could also work with our 311 operators if people wanted to provide comments to 311, capture that. Because as we've heard from a lot of people, 2 o'clock on a Tuesday isn't a great time for people to come. So we regularly get feedback that people want staff to meet in the evening to do this meeting, which really isn't the purpose of this group. It's to do our normal city job. So I think we were already feeling a pressure to create a different transparent process for people to provide comments. But really, this is the place for people to provide feedback is either at a ward meeting, a neighborhood meeting, or at the Land Use Commission if this item is moving forward at Land Use Commission.
So would this put an obligation on council members to host community meetings?
I'm going to suspect that most of you are probably already talking about these items at your regular meetings, or if it's a hot button enough issue, you're probably going to have a meeting about that particular topic. But I think it also sets a better expectation when people have come to these meetings. And it's really, we get them maybe for the plan developments that are more controversial, and maybe, some specific neighborhood projects that people have some concerns about. One of the challenges there is people think that this is a way to stop the process. And when we've met, that's really not the moment to stop. There's nothing staff can do. We're just checking to make sure there's conformance with the code. So I think that there's, from a transparency standpoint, it's in some ways kind of frustrating for the members of the public to see this and feel like they're not being heard. And transparency-wise, going to a community meeting before something is quote-unquote entered a process, or being at the Land Use Commission where there is a process, is probably in some ways a better transparent and more reflects the democratic community that we're trying to be.
Great, thank you. I think that's it for me.
Councilmember Ravel.
Just a couple of quick questions, because I do find the DAPR minutes that go to the Land Use Commission and then ultimately come to Planning and Development, I find those very helpful. So would you still be providing some kind of?
Yes, we would.
Staff, okay. Because I do find that very helpful. And if the staff votes no on a proposal, the applicant can still take it to the Land Use Commission, is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, yeah. Well, I do think, this, it does create a more efficient process, and yet it still provides a way for all the staff to provide their input. And I do think it's very helpful for the applicant to be able to be, so the applicant would be able to attend some of these gatherings of all the relevant staff.
I'm envisioning it a little bit like special events committee, where you have all these staff who provide information for something, and then for the larger events, the city council will ultimately be making a decision on them. Mm-hmm. So I think those are the kinds of things that the applicant, anybody who needs to participate. But then, this also gives us flexibility. Sometimes applicants don't want to come physically. We like to meet physically in person because it's been a really good experience since we started meeting again in the spring. But for some really simple things, it's not worth it for somebody to drive an hour, 45 minutes to get here.
Right.
For something that could be 30 minutes and then drive an hour, 45. So this also helps us be a little bit more business friendly in terms of being able to offer Zoom or Google Meets for things that are pretty simple.
Yep, great. Thank you.
CARP objective.
Councilmember Reed.
Yeah, I generally support. I think DAPR serves a positive function in the process, so I support the existence of the DAPR committee. I in alignment with, I think what I've heard is, I also do not think DAPR should vote. I think that DAPR should provide folks, because it's just, staff, seeking, is this in compliance with code or not? I think if anything, there shouldn't be a vote. There should just be a determination that as it stands, it's in compliance, or as it stands, it's not in compliance, and then leave the vote at, nothing further than that, or just an explanation where it is not in compliance. And so I'd like to see that reflected in this. I also think we should require that DAPR be I think there's benefits, so I won't say now that I think we should require, but I do think there's benefit to DAPR being a public meeting, whether it's public or not. Certainly, I think it should exist, and it helps that folks who are developers and the council members and staff and the committees get an understanding of what's going on. But I think there's a benefit to having it be a public meeting, and I guess I won't go so far as to say I think it should be required, but I certainly think it should be mandated that the committee not take votes. Thank you.
Seeing no other comments, what I will say is, one of the things I've heard a lot is that sometimes the community feels like they're not aware of a project until it's much further along in the process. And here we have in DAPR an opportunity for not only the developer and not only staff, but community members of the public, including the elected public, to join a meeting, not necessarily to provide comment, but just to listen in and learn about that project, but also through that project, it informs you, you learn from it, and it informs how you evaluate future projects. And it's a lot more formal, I would imagine, from the Land Use Commission, now called the Land Use Commission, because it's in a room and you're in close proximity to one another. You could even bring a model in. And it's a lot more informal than what I think the Land Use Commission is, which is a quasi-judicial body. And I think it's a good on-ramp, not only for, again, staff and developers, but for community members and elected officials. And I'm fine with most everything really we've said. The only thing that I would add is I think we need to record it. We can do it similar to what we do with reparations, where it's not a live recording, but those meetings are recorded and it's placed online for people to review. I don't think something that is going from in person to writing makes it more accessible. I don't have time to read anything, like from the packets for all the committees that I sit on, which is pretty much all of them, and the city council. I don't have time, and I don't think our community members have a ton of time to read through yet another document to try to keep up with what's happening with the city. And it's much easier to just go in person if it's something of interest to you, or to watch a video recording. And so what I would like to see is just some way where we could provide a recording. I think moving it to remote might be a way to do it, unless staff feels like it's important to meet in person from time to time. But I think a remote is a good way to get everybody at the meeting, but also there's an easy recording function within Zoom or Google Meet, and I think that would be just fine. And when we send out those notices, as you said, there could be a link to those videos so that people know, okay, the day after the meeting, I can go on and skip directly to the part of the discussion that's referring to the project that's in my neighborhood. And I think it's important not to get an interpretation of what went on, and not only to know like what the determinations were, but to be able to follow the fact pattern and how those decisions were made. I think is incredibly important early on in the stage. So that's I don't know if I need a motion for that, or if we can at least come back. Is this just consideration? This is just intro, right?
This is introduction.
So if we could just come back with, and it doesn't need a response today, but just something that we can do. I'm sure there's some research that staff needs to do to determine costs and all of that. But I'd love to know how we can do that.
I would be reluctant to make some of this an ordinance. I think administratively we can handle some of these things. The one I can tell you, I can look at a DAPR agenda and tell you, after doing this for many years, what items are going to call out people. It's usually a commercial project that's next to residential, anything that involves a balcony, anything that is a new development on a previously lower, any downtown bigger developments are going to draw out people. I also don't know if DAPR is the proper. We also have 4 or 5 items sometimes on these agendas. So when people want to say something, we're also often asking them to be brief, and there's not a chance for them to get that hands-on kind of open house kind of feeling. We could think about, and I could take feedback and we could figure this out, but some kind of open house that doesn't have to happen under this DAPR process. It could be some kind of open house that precedes it. The community development department, the staff is happy to help host something like that with a developer so people can see it, ask questions, get there. Staff can be there to absorb the comments and get feedback on these things. happy to do that in advance of the actual design and project review process. But I think to have I want to give people more opportunity to get feedback and give feedback, but in recording, we can certainly record record meetings in person. We can link up, but I think the meetings run more efficiently when we're in person. We get better feedback. People aren't doing other things while they're on. I get a better attentive staff when we're in those meetings.
Yeah, so I would just say to determine what the cost is to do a narrow, a targeted list of DAPR meetings that typically get higher turnouts. Again, we just saw a 30 unit townhome project in the Fifth Ward, right? That's one where it would be great to have that meeting recorded and provided online. I learned a lot myself, and I know the community would as well. So I would say, since this is intro, if we could, you've heard our concerns, my concerns, if you could just come back with like costs, even if it's for a more narrow, targeted list of DAPR meetings, and maybe not every DAPR meeting, that would at least be helpful. Councilman Reed.
If, just point of information, when you say come back, what do you mean? So once we vote on it for introduction here, it then goes to council and leaves this committee?
For intro, though. Right, for intro. So I can ask for it then. Not for intro and action, just intro, correct?
Then it's going to be on council's agenda tonight, so the next time we see it, it'll be for action.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So I can communicate this
Okay.
at the council meeting.
So work between the intervening time to
Correct.
workshop what you're looking for in terms of getting that extra information.
Just the targeted list and costs, so that we could at least discuss that as a council and know what we would need to do to continue to provide that those meetings in a recorded fashion. Any other comments or questions before we vote on this? All right, seeing none, I think we can call the question.
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Harikars?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
All right, that passed. That will be moving on to council. That brings us to P3. Can someone move item P3?
Mr. Chair, I will move item P3, which is Ordinance 53-0-22, amending City Code Title 6 to add billboards as a special use.
Is there a second? All right, it's been moved by Councilmember Nusma and seconded by Councilmember Ravel. Councilmember Hedekadis, did you have a question? Did you want to kick us off?
I was just seconding the motion.
Councilmember Reed. Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I guess I need a little more clarification about the Firehouse Grill request. So you're interested in basically like a sign on your building?
Yeah, on the backside of it.
On the backside of the building?
Like along the L track, so you would see it from street view.
Right, yeah, right. So looking at the definition of billboard that's in our packet, that's different from what you're asking for, because it's asking for, the billboard definition talks about a sign that's on a location other than on the structure, on the property itself. So I'm thinking what you're looking for is an expanded definition of a sign. So I don't know if staff would like to address that.
Mr. Fowler, are you looking for a sign for Firehouse or to sell signage for something else?
To sell signage for something else.
It's not to advertise Firehouse Grill. Aha, okay.
Mr. Fowler, you might want to come to the microphone.
And I think the distinction is still that I would be comfortable allowing it when it's not viewable from the street, which I think is the case here. It would only be viewable from if you were passing along in a train car, if that's what you call that, Councilman Reed.
To me, I don't necessarily think that we need to add more billboards anywhere in the city. I think we can, yeah, I mean, that's my opinion. I don't think, from my knowledge, can staff demonstrate how much we expect to gain in revenue? I've heard that thrown around. I heard someone say that this would provide revenue. Has that been said? I think, yeah, I would imagine not much.
I wouldn't know how much it would get. I mean, if we collect a fee for it, I think we have a handful of them still in existence. It's not.
Yeah, yeah. I
would say for my experience in revenue generating things, you need to have a lot of them for it to justify the staff time and the cost. So a lot of the things like contractor registration, where we tell everybody to pay a fee so they can do construction work, replace the license that we used to require of people. But the volume because we require all the contractors to do that activity is a legitimate revenue generator for the city. And it's hundreds and hundreds of these every year. But I don't think you're going to get that kind of revenue versus the staff time.
agreed. Unless there's some kind of monthly fee that we imposed on this, and even then, I don't think it would generate much revenue. And, I'll just note another thing. I don't know where or how in Evanston you can create a billboard that's not visible from the street that's also visible to the L. I just don't think that's possible. It may not be facing, I think even this says two-way, but it may not be facing the street, but it's still going to be visible from the street. And in fact, it'll be, depending on what's on the face of the advertisement, it may even be uglier to have the back of just some metal structure facing the sidewalk. So,
Just quickly on that point, Pat, can you explain where this would be and why you feel it would not be visible from the street?
So it would be on the west side of the building along the L track. So the way, the way it is now, the L comes to just about the first story of the building, but there's 2 stories. So where that second story goes above the L, there's a brick, like a brick wall that goes along right there. So if it's on that side of the building, I don't see any
so it would
way
be
you could
affixed
see
to the
it from
building
street.
itself?
I'm sorry?
It would be affixed to the building itself?
Correct.
To clarify here, we're not voting on a specific proposal.
I know, yeah,
Right,
but
okay.
just, yeah, just, it's informative.
Councilman
of
Reed,
it.
are you, any more questions, comments?
I would be more supportive of this maybe if it were affixed directly to a building and it wasn't erecting some pole that has billboards on it. But if it's on a building and it's not visible from the street, I think about like driving through Wrigley, that's more acceptable to me.
Councilmember Newsome.
I don't want more billboards on the street, but I'm comfortable having advertisements visible from the L and from the Metro, is what it boils down to for me.
Yeah, and I don't see any other, Councilman Reed, you can go ahead.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel the same way. And I wasn't descriptive as to where exactly this was, but in a conversation we had during the break, it allowed me to understand that this would not be visible from the street. And even if it's somewhat visible, I still would be okay because.
Right, I'm not hung up if you can stand
what I'm
in a
saying,
certain
yeah.
corner and look at a certain
And then,
angle in
like,
a
do all
certain
this,
direction,
like,
and
no.
maybe you can see it if you look that way. I'm not hung up on that.
During normal driving, you're going to look up if there's a billboard, and I can see that being a concern, but I don't see this as a concern. So if there's a way to specifically carve something out from this use, I'm fine with that. Councilman Reed.
Yeah, I just think the language would have to be amended to, to be one, it would have to have one face, and here it says faces. So it would have to be a single face, it would have to be affixed to a building, and it would have to be facing away from the public way. And so, I don't know if the train is considered, yeah. Or it can be facing toward a train line. I don't know how we write that with legalese. I'll leave that to council, but that's what I'd be supportive. And now that I think of it, if we're not talking about the erected billboards, then I take the train here at Foster all the time. And at Foster, there's a billboard that you can see for Dial-A-Made, I believe it is, that's affixed to the building where like Pizza Hut is or something like that. And so there are, with that understanding of exactly what you're trying to do, and maybe, you know, while we're not talking about your case specifically, we can draft the law in a way that allows that. I think we can get somewhere, and it wouldn't be a shift from what we're already doing. I'm curious how even those billboards that are fixed to the side of that building now with the Dial-A-Made thing are allowed. So,
Director Nine, could you speak to that?
I was going to say something else, but Councilmember Suffredin
Oh.
has asked to be added to comments.
Oh, I see. Councilmember Hedekades, is your hand up as well? Would you like to make a comment?
Sure. I just want, I have one question for staff that's there. If we allow for special use, they still have to be approved, correct? So this wouldn't be like an open, you know, season to, you know, have your, put up a billboard, but all these things would still, if it's special use, you'd have to go through the proper channels to get it okay, correct?
Correct. It would still have to go through a special use.
And that means approval at the Land Use Commission and then ultimately council.
Correct.
And so I think for me personally, I wouldn't want us to be too restrictive at the special use portion. I think, you know, there's a lot of different use cases and, you know, we could just, you know, evaluate these proposals as they come through.
Councilmember Suffredin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to say, you know, putting aside Mr. Fowler's nascent proposal, part of the issue that came up with this is that we don't have any sort of framework for allowing this anyway, and that's the discussion that I really want us to have. I don't know what the revenue the city could realize from fees for billboards on private property might be, but one thing that I had a brief conversation with Sean Cholik about is like what potential revenue could the city get from advertisement on city property. You know, we have a lot of property along the train lines. You know, I mentioned before at James Park right now, there are ads on the scoreboards and on the batting cage. I don't know that Chobani, who has a banner on the batting cage, is an active fee payer. There's potential for us to realize revenue with advertisements on city property, and you know, depending on what form those take, if those are digital boards, they could also be an opportunity for the city to publicize city events or city services as they rotate through advertisements and announcements. So, you know, I think that it's worth considering some sort of framework, one, to allow for people like Mr. Fowler to have an opportunity to explore putting advertisements on the property. But I think, you know, the other thing and the larger revenue benefit to the city would be from having the freedom to explore what type of revenue the city could get from advertisement on city property, whether that's facing outward, like it would be if you had, you know, billboards facing the train tracks, or you know, inward if you had an information kiosk that rotated through advertisements or something like that. So, you know, I think without knowing how much money we're leaving on the table by not doing it, it's hard to say whether or not the juice is worth the squeeze. But I think it's a conversation that is worth having and can be done within the confines of the aesthetic concerns that were raised by the Land Use Commission, and I would imagine would be raised by members of the community as well.
Appreciate that. And I just want to quickly say, before I go to Councilman Reed, I don't think I agree with all those points, and it's also not a simple formula because we also want to help businesses make money and generate revenue and stay here in Evanston. So we also have to incorporate that into our thinking. Councilman Reed, we're gonna close here, and then we're gonna likely it sounds like we need to still work on this, but I'd like to move on after your comments.
Yeah, that's where my comments were, which is I think we should remand this back to the whatever committee, the
Land use?
land use committee. Yeah, it's a new committee. I have a resident or maybe residents who serve on that committee. I spoke specifically with one of them who's been active on that committee for a long time. I think it has been the common practice of many members of this body to agree with what came before, with what the committee before said, or with staff. And so I think that, given the comments that we have had here, and Johanna, correct me if I'm wrong, I suppose you staff land use, correct?
I do not, but my staff does staff land use.
But not you personally?
I go to the meetings, but I am not the staff member.
Okay, but you're there. And so
Yes.
my point in raising that is that I think some of these points that we discussed today may not have come up during that discussion, particularly based on my conversation with one of the members today. I don't think the idea that that we could amend it in a way to only allow billboards that are attached to a building and all the other stuff we discussed. I don't think that came up, did it?
I think what you're talking about is like transit-oriented billboarding. I think what has come up is it's a transit-oriented billboarding, like TOB. So TOD, it's TOB, and that is different than what was discussed at the Land Use Commission about this. I think they were looking at billboards in all districts as special uses.
Yeah.
Councilman Reed, can someone make the referral?
Yeah,
you've had enough
I'm
discussion.
going to make a motion
to refer it to.
Yeah. I'm going to move to refer this back to the Land Use Commission
Can someone
with
second
the
that,
feedback
please?
of this committee.
Is there a second?
Does that make sense? I'll second.
All right, any discussion? Seeing none, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Nusma?
Aye.
Councilmember Burns?
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel?
Aye.
Councilmember Reed?
Aye.
Councilmember Hadikatis?
No.
4-1.
Okay, motion passed. This will be referred back to the Land Use Commission. Items for discussion. D1, summary of planning and development subcommittee discussion regarding rental registration and licensing. Do we have a quick presentation from Angel? Or?
We don't have a presentation. I think,
Just a
given
discussion.
the hour of time, I think we provided a pretty robust memo on what has happened at the subcommittee, and I think we're at a place where we're prepared to, if there's additional comments or input, but study the feasibility and preparing something for the 2023 budget.
Councilman Reed.
I'm preparing something for the 23rd. Are we talking about the landlord licensing versus rental?
Correct.
Yeah.
So what are you prepared to bring forward for budget?
Prepared to prepare?
Yeah.
I think that's, my understanding is what kind of staff we would need, how this would integrate with the software that we're starting to onboard, the modules that we would build out, what kind of fees and just the general how we would roll this out, the outreach that we need to do to make sure that people know what this is.
Yeah, I think that there's still discussions to be had in a committee, and I think it would make sense to allow the housing subcommittee to move on with its work and look at 3 unrelated and all of the other things that were kind of really meant to be the brunt of what that housing subcommittee was to look at, and maybe kick this to another committee a subcommittee to allow for that committee to really focus in on this issue.
Councilmember Ravel.
Well, I'm loath to see us create another subcommittee, but certainly in terms of input for the 2023 budget, definitely we need to have a database software setup that's going to really help us, whether we continue with registration or with shift to licensing. We really need to have that in place, and for sure, my understanding is we need roughly 2 or 3 more building inspectors and a staff person in the office to kind of keep feeding things into the database and helping support the building inspectors. So, and then I guess in terms of all the material that was referred to in our packet, I'd just like to call everybody's attention to it's called, it's one of the several publications by Alan Malik that were referred to in our packet, and in particular one called Raising the Bar, Linking Landlord Incentives and Regulation Through Rental Licensing. And basically that particular publication talks about what a municipality should do to create a licensing program that's going to work effectively. And one of the very first things that it recommends is that you do a really important community engagement process. So in particular, engaging landlords to get their input about how they would view this licensing program, what kinds of incentives, and because ultimately we want to set it up and then we want the landlords to participate. And so I think if they're engaged in the process of helping us develop the program, they'll be more likely to be part of the program and get licensed. And they can help us think through how to reach out to other landlords and what kinds of incentives to build into the program that would encourage significant, strong participation by the landlord community. So I don't know if that has a budget implication, but I guess I would see that as kind of the next step in whether that's something that we can just ask staff to do or how we would handle that. But I guess I would suggest that be a really important next step.
Just to move this along, what I would recommend is Chair, is 2 options. One, I can bring this back as a special meeting so that we can discuss this further. I would much rather the option that Councilman Reed suggested, which is we refer this to a new subcommittee that can meet twice. And I think if we can meet twice as a committee along with non-voting community members, which I would recommend people like Gail Schechter and Cheryl Ring and Cheryl Lawrence, some of the same folks that we had on our town hall that CABG organized a few weeks ago. I think we can get something in front of the council to react to and vote on. We haven't had that opportunity yet. There's been a lot of back and forth and some disagreements, but we haven't created a space where the experts can really co-create with us. And so I think as chair, we have 2 options. I'm more than happy to hold a special meeting so that we can discuss this, whether we have a quorum or not. I think I would invite those members to come out, and the agenda would only be that. We would have an opportunity to discuss it. Again, I think a better option is to refer this to a new subcommittee that would meet twice.
Point of information, Chair Burns, you're talking about a special meeting of the existing subcommittee. Or of this committee?
Of this committee, of the Planning and Development Committee.
Because there already exists a subcommittee to which this
is going to move on. It was going to move on and discuss, I think, 3 unrelated
So
questions.
why not a special meeting of that subcommittee?
Again, I think that it's a bandwidth issue. Like we're already.
It's been discharged. We voted to move it back.
We voted to move it forward. There was a stalemate. I think, again, the next step is a special meeting of this body, or which I'm happy to do, whether we have a quorum or not. We can call the meeting and have an opportunity to discuss it, or we could discuss it further, refer it to another committee. And the reason why this is important is, from my experience in the private market, to make these type of decisions, and this is what I don't think we do well, this could take dozens of meetings. And we meet like 4 times on things as critical and as heavy of a list as this, and we think we're going to come up with good recommendations. It's just not how it works. We need more time to discuss this in finer detail that our current process just doesn't seem to allow. And while I'm chair, I'm going to create that space so that we can really give this the time that it deserves. And so those are the 2 options. Again, I'm happy to do it either way, but we need more time to discuss this alongside our subject matter experts in the community. Sarah Flax would like to say something to us. Thank you.
Good evening, members of the committee. Sarah Flax, Housing and Grants Manager. I was thinking that when we first were going to change our inclusionary housing ordinance, there was a great deal of discussion at the council level and things like that. And one of the things that we didn't reach was any kind of consensus. And one of the things we did was we had a town hall, sort of a town hall. It was a meeting with people, with developers and others who were involved directly in it. And we had discussions and found out what they thought were good, what they thought were bad. And then we came and brought an ordinance draft to planning and development and then the council. I think that, this is one of the things that Alan Malik is a real guru in this stuff. And he says, engage the people you're trying to get to cooperate. And those are the landlords. And we can certainly involve the people from the panel in discussions, but I think they can be community discussions. They don't have to be this body to get the input and get the landlords on board. I think that's the key thing, because we have some landlords. And when the city tried to do licensing in 2012, I think we'd moved along. I wasn't really involved in that and had gone to council, and then all of a sudden the landlords came out and said, we don't like this, and the whole thing just got derailed. And so I think that maybe we just need to talk to, we've had after the subcommittee meetings, landlords come up to us and say, I'd love to be involved and talk about this. I have really good information on how we might even help with the database and things like that. So I think we have some people who are really interested in participating. So I would really think that if we can work, as Johanna said, to say, how can we get a database in shape? And the civic platform has a module for this, so we need to find out what it would cost. I think there'd also have to be some outreach through mailings and things like that to get to landlords. So I would propose that you give staff the opportunity to put together something like this to try to, and we can engage council members, because council members came to the meetings then. So I think that people who are interested could absolutely participate, and maybe that would take some of the onus off of more committee meetings for all of you, but you could also have the same involvement. Just a thought.
My intention would be to invite landlords out to participate again as non-voting members in this committee that we could create. I don't know if we need another town hall. We've had some. I don't know if a town hall is we've had some sparsely attended town halls as of recent. I think a better way forward again is to create another committee and to invite both our subject matter experts in the area of rental housing and fair housing, and invite our landlords to participate in the discussion. What I will say is they have participated. I would say they've made up more of the audience at our planning and development subcommittee meetings than anyone else. And so they have been there present and participating and speaking with us both before and after meetings. So I think, again, a simple fix is just to invite those folks out to have a discussion. Again, I don't think it requires a town hall. We haven't done that as successful as of late. I think we could do it in still a committee format, hold it to 2 meetings that is facilitated, and we can get a recommendation. We're close. And also, for those who didn't participate in the CABG meeting, it might be hard for you to understand where I'm coming from, because that is, I'm trying to recreate that town hall, and essentially it was an online town hall, but with the people who were on the panel. And together, when we were together talking and co-creating together, we got a lot further, really, than most, I would say, of the committee meetings that we've had. So if we can recreate that still in a controlled committee environment, I think with 2 meetings, we could come back with some sound recommendations for the committee to react to and vote on.
Perhaps a better definition would be a working meeting. It was really more a workshop, because we had people in tables and people talked. So a town hall wasn't a good definition. But I do want to point out the panel discussion, much of that discussion did not have anything to do with landlord licensing or rental or registration. It was talking about other things that the subcommittee has on its agenda, like updating the fair housing ordinance and those things. So I'm not quite sure how all of that would fit in one thing. Because
Yeah,
some of
because
this-
I think that's what we realize is that most of the concerns that people had around licensing, it's really not licensing, it's something else. So, for example, the primary concern I hear about licensing is not licensing, it's licensing when combined with crime-free ordinances, which we don't have in Evanston, right? So
Right.
I think through those discussions, we were able to really determine what we would like to see in order to achieve fair housing in Evanston, and we took it away from licensing. That's the point, is that licensing and registration seems like this big scary thing, but it's really not. Like, if we can get on the same page about what we would like to see moving forward, what we don't want to see in the policy, I think we can get some sound recommendations to council, and we don't have that right now. That's not in the packet, and we have not achieved that. So I'm trying to create a space where we can do that. Happy to do it as a working group, if that's what we're going to do it. Do not think it should be quite what you described. I think, again, it should be structured and formal, and we should invite folks to come out and participate. I agree with that. But let's hear from, I don't know who was first. Let's say Councilman Ravel, I believe, was first. Did I get that right, Nusma? Councilman Nusma.
Okay. I think we might be having a semantic argument, but you guys, it sounds like you're both heading in the same direction. Let's get a group of people in a room sitting around a table to hash it out. Right, Sarah, that's what you're looking for. Bobby, that's what you're looking for. Right, so whether we call that a
Correct.
committee, whether we call that a working group, whether we call that a task force, let's just make that happen. Right, with this and any number of issues, the way to move forward, the way to get progress is to get people in a room and hash it out. Right.
It's somewhat controlled, structured
In a somewhat controlled
environment,
structure,
which is
and-
not always the case at open town halls.
And
I've
OMA
been in
compliant.
this town enough, yeah.
Right, so I am loath to create a new committee just because that's my reflexive reaction to bureaucracy. Like, nobody wants to go to another committee meeting. I'd rather go to a task force meeting than a committee meeting, even if it's the exact same thing. So regardless of what we call it, and maybe we have to decide what to call it, I like the idea of putting a group of people in a room to work it out. So thumbs up on the concept. If we need to belabor the point as to what we call it, so be it. But I'm on board with the idea.
Councilman Ravel.
I guess I'm going to second what Councilmember Nusma just said. If we can identify what are the key questions or the key issues that we need to address in order to move forward with drafting a licensing ordinance, that would be, in my view, the desired outcome of this process. If I had to identify the key issue in my mind that we need to figure out is when we have a landlord who is not, no matter what, is not fixing up the building and the tenants are in a dismal situation, and we take that landlord's license away, how are we going to take care of the tenants? So that, in my mind, that's the key issue that I want to see resolved. So, whether maybe what we're talking about is a working group. I mean, the planning and development sponsored something or other on rental licensing.
Second. No.
Director Knighton.
So I think I will summarize saying it sounds like we're in a space of semantics, and perhaps what we could do is do a collaborative working group with staff. I'm looking at this from an administrative standpoint. Our days are numbered to prepare the technology in which to make this work, and I don't want to do an 11th hour thing, and we know 11th hour technology never works out. So if we could, there's some sort of administrative staff pieces that I think if we can get working on those now, then we can air them out, get some feedback now, like sooner rather than later, and that I think will inform a little bit of how this is received, and we could also work through a process to get some feedback from the people you're imagining might be in the community / town hall. But if we could start working on that, but what I was going to suggest is that we start to maybe provide we have this communication section in the planning and development agenda, we could start to include some written updates on that brief. They could be brief. They could include some materials as we move forward. It keeps it in the public, keeps in the city, the community, the packet, and also keeps you all informed about what's going on.
Councilman Reed.
I was just going to close this out and move back to what I said a few minutes ago, which is to make the motion to create, I'll call it a task force that is comprised of whoever on this committee wants to join, and
Well, it can't be whoever, because then it's an OMA thing. So we're saying no more than 2, or what's the?
well, so are we saying that we can't have it, or is staff saying that there's no
It
capacity?
depends
to
on.
hold
It
an
still
open meeting?
depends on how many of us participate. So we could say like the.
Well, no, it wouldn't matter how many of us. Well, I mean, I guess yes,
Why?
it would if.
We're literally talking about.
But
what's
it
on-
would be a public meeting, so we could all.
It's just the amount of people. So like the Here to Stay committee, which I think we're going to talk about next, is a working group that I have, but it's just I'm the only elected official on there, so
Yeah.
it's a working group. So what is the limit for us? Is it 1? Is it 2? It's 2. So 2 people. I obviously would want to participate in this, which is why I say essential. Would staff participate?
I mean, I think if you wanted to make we get some community people, landlords, members of this, 2 members of this committee, we have staff.
Okay. Do we want to establish another? Who's the second
I
person?
want to be a part of it. So
Anybody have any issues with that, or is that fine? That's fine.
I'm not volunteering.
One
to be
member,
on this
one,
So,
Councilmember Reed?
thank you
Councilmember
both
Ravel,
for
you
offering
okay
your
with that?
time.
Okay, we're good. So what do you mean? There's a motion made. Was there a second?
So do you want to clarify what the motion was?
Yeah, so the motion is to create a working group. Councilmember Reed and I will be the city council representatives or planning and development committee members represented on that working group, as well as members of the public landlords as well as subject matter experts.
And so this, I mean, I'd be interested in listening in on this discussion, so this is going to be a public meeting.
Well, that's why I said we should be another committee.
It's a public meeting, then there's.
I don't see why it.
That's
couldn't
why I
be a
said
public
another
meeting.
committee meeting. Like,
Yeah.
just make it a committee. We get so scared of having additional committee meetings, but again, I said that because I know people want to participate and we want to notice it. And
Right. Well, when
That's-
I say I don't want to have us keep creating more committees, is I'm thinking more about staff.
no, I understand. I mean, could Councilmember Ravel participate? I mean, could she be that? She could even be in attendance.
Councilor Cummings is probably going to tell us no.
He's got the no
Lawyers love
walk.
that, right?
I wasn't
walk
planning
looked
on
like
it.
a no walk.
Good evening, members of the Planning and Development Committee, Corporation Counsel Nicholas Cummings. So there are 7 members of this committee, I believe. The minute you have 3, you are now subject to the Open Meetings Act. So if you want to have this working group, and it doesn't matter if they're participating in the group or in attendance, the fact that they are there will trigger OMA. So.
Thank you. So do we want to keep it as a working group at 2, or again, my other suggestion was to make it a subcommittee?
Let's not make this such a formal thing that it sounds like it's going to go on forever.
It won't. I said 2 meetings.
Okay.
Oh, yeah,
And
I
and then
can-
I guess then I would say, well, what's wrong with having it be subject to OMA? And, any of us who want to come can come.
We still have to produce minutes, and then that goes against what you're trying to achieve with
I'm going to
staff.
suggest, how about a special meeting or 2 special meetings of the Planning and Development Housing Subcommittee?
We already sent it out of there, though.
And there'd be no difference between that and this, as far as what
Other
staff
than
would
it's,
have to do.
we're creating a new committee. Whatever.
How
I think
about you
we're-
meet as a working group? Councilmember Ravel could maybe expect a phone call from somebody afterwards. We could record it, just like we're going to do for Dapper. And then we could provide an update to P&D at a later date.
If you don't watch the football game live, it's not fun to watch it after.
We'll let Councilmember Ravel decide. Is that fine?
So let's record the meeting, the working group meeting. We can put it on the website, and then maybe one of your colleagues can give you a phone call to tell you how the seats were.
Is that fine? Okay. All right, so you want to make a, I explained it.
I will then second.
Okay.
If Councilmember.
Well, let's just
Ravel's
make the
comfortable,
motion
I'll
again, because I feel like I'm going to get a call from Council Cummings saying we didn't do this properly.
Email later that
It's
it
been a
wasn't
lot of
done
back and forth,
properly.
exactly. Which he's doing his job with that. So
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
get
yeah.
another motion, please.
So the motion is that a subcommittee will be a working group
Of two.
that is a committee, because we're not going to do all May. Okay. I move that we have a working group of two folks, including Councilmember Burns and myself, and various members of the housing advocacy community and landlords and renters and whoever else, meet for 2 meetings, 2 to 3 meetings. 2 meetings
2 meetings to start is fine.
to discuss and provide a proposal for the landlord licensing issue.
You got a
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Seeing none, can you please call the roll?
Councilmember Nusma.
Aye.
Councilmember Burns.
Aye.
Councilmember Ravel.
Aye.
Councilmember Reed.
Aye.
Councilmember Hadi Kadis.
We couldn't hear you, Councilmember.
Aye.
There it is. Thank you. Items for communication. So that motion passed. Next up, items for communication. I'm fine just moving that. Can we move that to the?
Well, the last item was just a discussion item, and this is just a communication. We haven't normally talked about communication. They're just there for information.
Oh, okay, I see.
But if you'd like us to reappear, if you'd like it
Yeah, if
to
you
be a
could-
discussion item, we can move it to discussion
If
for
you can
next
move
meeting.
it for, to a discussion item on the next agenda, please.
Sure.
Thank you. Cool. All right. Seeing no other business before us, this meeting is adjourned.